You're hearing the notes of an A minor chord, A, C, and E. On top of this A minor chord, there's a lot of notes that sound good, like the notes of the A minor scale. These all sound very nice on top of my A minor chord. There's other notes that sound good as well, like the major seventh. The major seventh has a little bit of spice on top of my minor chord. Other notes like the tritone even sound good. Here's a tritone, and you can hear even the tritone sounds good on top of a minor chord. But you know what doesn't sound good on top of a minor chord, and is very rarely heard, is the major third. It's really not a welcome sound, and most people don't enjoy it. We're hearing a chord with both types of third. But what's really weird is this exact same set of notes is very popular and sounds great, and we love the way it sounds. So how can that happen? How can we have something that sounds so bad and also sounds so good at the same time? And that's what this entire lesson is going to be all about, is the clashing of thirds. How can we harness that for good? How can we avoid it when it gets evil? More broadly, we're going to be examining the role of how major thirds and minor thirds might have both appear at the same time in a song, either on top of each other or kind of being mutually exclusive and kind of shifting back and forth. This is a topic I explore pretty deeply in my new book, The Signals Music Chord Progression Codex, but it's taught over several chapters, so I thought it would be helpful to combine a lot of those concepts into one simple video here. To get started, I want to begin with a basic musical truth, something you want to remember, something we just want to accept as a fact. And that's that minor chords really don't welcome major thirds. All right, that's what we heard at the beginning of this video. If we're trying to present a minor chord, which traditionally has this dark, sad, dramatic atmosphere to it, then adding the major third in there is just going to pollute that ambience. It's not going to add to the minor flavor, and it's really just going to confuse our ear. So that's just one thing we kind of want to accept for now. We'll talk a little bit about this at the end of the video, but for now, just kind of think, if you're playing a minor chord, don't pollute it with a major third. But let's switch directions a little bit. Let's talk about major chords. Here's an A major chord, A, C sharp, and E. And this is a very stable chord. It's so stable, in fact, that it can actually support the sound of a minor third on top of it. So here's what we'll do. Let's listen. Well, first let's listen to a major third, all right? Here's an A major chord, and what I'll play is I'll play the notes A, C sharp, and E. Those are the notes of the chord, but I'll also add in this fourth here. So I have 1, 3, 4, 5. 1, 3, 4, 5. This sounds pretty good, right? As it should. But let's change my major third to a minor third instead. 1 flatted third, fourth, and fifth. I think this sounds pretty good too. To me, this sounds more bluesy and rocking, as opposed to that kind of happy, sweet sound we heard earlier. So what we're hearing is the minor third on top of a major chord. And the result is this nasty clashing that we actually like. It's this bluesy, rocking sound that we've grown to really enjoy. It's a clashing that is actually, preferable to us. So if we're trying to present a major chord, yes, you can throw a minor third on top and we're just basically going to create the blues. But there's a music theory problem here. It's a little frustrating. Chords can't handle both types of thirds. You can't call it like an A major minor third. You actually have to call this note a sharp 9. And if you do the math, that's the same thing as a sharp 2. But the number 2 is reserved for suspended chords. So if you want to add a minor third to your major chord, just call it a sharp 9. So this chord right here is A major, add sharp 9. But here's the deal, if we're going to bluesify our major chord like this, there's another note that's probably going to come along for the ride, and that's the flat 7. The flat 7 just adds a little bit of extra bluesy commotion to that set of notes. And it creates the chord A7 sharp 9, which is very, very common in the guitar world. Casually, it's known as the Jimi Hendrix chord. A lot of Jimi Hendrix songs just use this chord as the tonic instead of a major chord. So if I'm writing an E major, we would normally get the chords E major and A and B. But if we decide to just bluesify our tonic chord, we could play E7 sharp 9. And you're going to hear that stuff a lot in Jimi Hendrix songs like Purple Haze and Foxy Lady. But I want you to think of sharp 9 and flat 7 as just being corrupting influences on a major chord. Our happy, innocent little major chord can just be, matured and corrupted a little bit by adding in that sharp 9 and adding in that flat 7 as well. And knowing that we can just bluesify or corrupt any major chord, it makes it pretty easy to use this chord all over the place. So, if I want to write a jam that's just A, D, and E, what if I play all of those chords as 7 sharp 9 chords? A7 sharp 9, D7 sharp 9, E7 sharp 9. I can easily turn that into some, you know, ruckus blues rock song, reminiscent of something that like Stevie Ray Vaughan might play. I need to bring up that we will often see the 7 sharp 9 chord in the 5 position. So if I'm in the key of A, it's really common to hear E7 sharp 9. All right, that resolves really well back to A major. We'll hear that in, for example, Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror. We also hear it in AC/DC's Shoot to Thrill. The 7 sharp 9 chord from the 5 resolving back to the 1 chord. And it also works in minor keys as well. I can go from E7 sharp 9 and resolve to A minor. And it works fairly well. But I really want you to go inside of this progression and see what's happening. We're actually hearing, in the key of A, when we do this, we're hearing both sevenths at the same time. We're hearing G sharp as the major 7th, but we're also hearing G natural. And they're both resolving up to this note A. And the reason I want to bring this up is because in a recent video, I said you don't want both 7ths floating around at the same time. Dorian has a flat 7. We're bringing in a major 7. We don't want those two to ever happen at the same time. Well, that's clearly not true, all right? There are times where you do want both 7ths floating around at the same time. But hopefully you agree that it's for those bluesier moments. In the video, I said I don't want both 7ths. I was going for something a little bit more harmonic, a little bit more, you know, melodic, and maybe more Renaissance era. And when I think of blues rock, I don't think of Renaissance and classical. So there's certainly a time to have both 7ths or both 3rds. But hopefully you'd agree those are for more bluesy, rockier moments. One last little detail here about that sharp 9. Normally when a chord calls for a 9th, we're free to play it an octave down as a 2nd instead. So A add 9 might be played like this, with a high B forming the 9th, or it might be played like this with a lower B forming the 2nd. But in a 7 sharp 9 chord, the sharp 9 is almost always seen up high on the chord, as heard here. And it's very rarely going to be played down low in the chord where it rubs up against the major 3rd. And lastly, though we wouldn't call it a sharp 9, we should expect that the minor 3rd might appear way underneath a major chord, as part of a bass line, heard here. Now here's another fun little feature of the blues and how minor 3rds and major 3rds work together. On top of a major chord, or a dominant 7th chord, or a 7 sharp 9 chord, it's really common to hear minor 3rds get corrected into major 3rds. And then, you know, something else happens. So here's a minor 3rd that gets immediately fixed. And hopefully you hear a really enjoyable, ritzy, bluesy sound. What's strange to me is this doesn't work as well in reverse. I don't like the sound of going major 3rd to minor 3rd. I think that just confuses my ear, but that sounds amazing to me. And this little correcting the 3rd or approaching the 3rd, this happens a lot in the rhythm department as well. So you'll often hear guitar players play like an A7 chord, but it has a minor 3rd that immediately gets corrected. You hear that? I've got this 3rd that's getting hammered on my guitar. So very, very common little trick to just approach that 3rd or correct that minor 3rd into that major 3rd. And once again, that creates a very bluesy sound to my ears, at least. Now, let's completely change directions. We're still going to start with a major chord, but now, when the minor 3rd comes in, it's not just going to get laid on top. Now, when the minor 3rd comes into our major key party, we're going to let it completely replace the major 3rd. So, major 3rd will leave the house when minor 3rd comes around. We would commonly refer to this as modal mixture because we're kind of changing parallel scales. But let's just demonstrate it. Here is an A major chord, and then here's an A major 7 chord, right? Obviously, we could use the A major scale over top of this, and that includes the major 3rd note, C sharp. But if I bring in a chord like C major 7, well, we've clearly brought in the minor 3rd, C, right? So how about over that chord, I don't let any major thirds happen. How about all my major thirds just get moved down to C, right? So they're kind of mutually exclusive. And you'll notice this does not create a bluesy effect because those thirds never have a chance to interact. Really what summons that blues spirit is when those thirds are rubbing up against one another. Here, they can't rub up against one another because it's just like they're sharing the same space. One leaves the stage when the other one comes on. So I've taken that simple little chord progression and I've arranged it into a little jam here for you so you can hear what it sounds like to explore the major third over the A major chord and explore the minor third over that C chord. Now, if you like that sound, you should really check out my other videos on modal mixture, where I go into that more in detail, specifically the one on combining minor and major, and also my video on borrowed chords. I think those would be very helpful supplements to this video if you're unfamiliar with those topics. So to briefly summarize, when our tonic chord is major, there's two common ways we'll see the minor third. Sometimes minor third just flies in and lands on our major tonic, and it smears it with this blues effect, right? And that's really enjoyable in blues and rock. Sometimes minor third comes in and kicks major third out of the party. And to me, that creates this more dreamy, in-between worlds that we might associate with modal mixture. But let's go back to minor tonics. In the key of A minor, I told you, we've already kind of observed the fact that we don't want to hear a C sharp smeared on top of my A minor chord. But you know what we do want to hear a lot? We do want to hear the minor third of that key get completely replaced with the major third. Right, so once again, sharing space. And this is what a Picardy third is. Check out my video on the Picardy third. But basically, we're in minor, and then all of a sudden, the minor third gets replaced with the major third. What rarely happens is the major third happens at the same time. We don't often hear that. We also rarely hear chords get borrowed that include the major third. So if I'm in the key of A minor, it's just rare to hear any C sharps, right? Unless you're doing like film score. If I bring in any chord with a C sharp, you'll hear it's gonna sound pretty dramatic. There's a C sharp minor. Well, that's a dramatic chord change. You might hear that in film score. Here's like an F sharp major. That has a C sharp in it, right? These are all like big magic chords and kind of haunting. They're not the chords you'd hear in your everyday pop song or love song. So really my point is that if your tonic is minor, yeah, major third is allowed in the door, but if major third comes in, it should probably take over completely, right? And minor third should just go away for a little bit. But I very rarely want to hear both thirds interacting with one another in that minor context. Now, here's the funny thing. The blues is maybe one of the easiest styles to start playing right out of the gate as a musician. It's not difficult. But this lesson made it difficult, right? We really went in depth into what's going on in the blues to try to figure out what gives it that sound. And I think this is really helpful if you've only learned classical music theory, right? If you've only learned like major scales and 1, 4, 5 chords, and then all of a sudden you join a blues band and you're like, wait a second, why are we playing minor thirds the entire time? Wait, they said it's a jam in A major, but I'm playing A minor pentatonic? That can be very confusing. I know it was for me. So hopefully this kind of illuminates to you that, yeah, major keys are supposed to have major thirds, but minor third, bring it on in, and we're going to have a party with that minor third. Same thing with flat 7. Bring flat 7 in there. We're going to have a party with that too, and it'll just bluesify that major sound altogether. And really, even though I don't believe in wrong music, I think one of the wrongest choices you could make in most instances is to try to present a minor chord and then somehow get a major third in that mix. Now, as a fun little follow-up to this video, I do recommend you head over to Adam Neely's channel and watch his video, Tick-Tock and Dissonance Do Not Mix. There's a lot of focus in that video on the same harmony that we're talking about here, the two thirds happening together at the same time. But being an Adam Neely video, it's a completely different style of presentation and a different approach altogether. But that's it for now. I hope you thought this video was educational, informative. If you appreciated this video, you have to thank my Patreon supporters for making it possible. I can't just make free stuff like this with no ads without their support. So they have my gratitude. Hopefully they have yours as well. If you'd like to join them, you can. There are links below in the description, but there are other ways to support this channel if you'd like to. You can buy my new book, The Signals Music Chord Progression Codex. The digital version's available everywhere, and the physical version is now available to ship to some countries. Or just head over to my site and check out some of the digital courses that I'm offering for sale. Some are even name your own price. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.